Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today because, well, we have a lot of incredibly important ground to cover. Over the past few days, we've gotten hit with two major breaking pieces of news that are going to affect absolutely every single person receiving Social Security in America, period. And I really want to make sure you're hearing about them directly and clearly right here. Because the honest truth is, most people just haven't heard this yet. You aren't getting this level of detail from those really brief 2-minute evening news segments. You certainly aren't hearing it from your local bank. And let's be real, the Social Security Administration isn't exactly sending out detailed, easy-to-read alerts to everyone's mailbox. So here's what happened. The first piece of news dropped on June 9th, and it involves a highly critical deadline for the entire program, a deadline that has just moved significantly closer to us. Then the second piece of news dropped a few days later on June 13th, and this one is based on the absolute latest inflation numbers. Now, the second update is actually the kind of news that points to more money going into your pocket next year, which sounds great, right? But as you might expect when it comes to this stuff, it comes with a major catch, a catch that you absolutely need to understand. So today, we're breaking both of these updates down in plain language. No complicated jargon, no unnecessary panic. Just exactly what these numbers mean for your specific situation and what you should be keeping in mind. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our agenda for today. First up, we'll look at the 2032 Trust Fund update. And second, we'll go through the new COLA projections. But before we start looking at specific dates and percentages, we really have to address the giant elephant in the room. I mean, this is the question on everyone's mind, right? It's the one that generates all those terrifying clickbait headlines you see online. Is Social Security really going bankrupt? Now, look, it is completely understandable to feel some serious anxiety when you see vague news coverage just casually throwing the word bankruptcy around. It's your livelihood. But today, I promise you, we are going to replace that fear with absolute, plain language facts, and we are getting these facts straight from the newly released Official Government Trustees Report. We're going to completely separate the mathematical reality from the sensationalized headlines so you can actually understand the structural mechanics of the program you rely on every single month. Section 1, the 2032 Trust Fund Update, moving the clock forward. Okay, so every single year, the Treasury Department and the Social Security Administration team up to publish an official, highly detailed government document. It's called the Trustees Report. Think of this report as basically the annual physical exam for the financial health of Social Security. It tells us exactly how long the reserve money is actually going to last. And the headline number from the June 9th release is 2032. That is the exact year the primary Social Security Retirement Fund, officially known as the OASI Trust Fund, is now projected to run completely out of its surplus reserves. And this timeline right here brilliantly illustrates why this year's report is causing such a massive stir. You see, in last year's report, the projected depletion date was the first quarter of 2033. But in this newly released report, that date has moved forward to the fourth quarter of 2032. It has officially moved up by one full quarter. Now, on the surface, I know a shift of just a few months might sound like a relatively small adjustment in the grand scheme of things. Like, what's a few months, right? But context is literally everything here. This is now the second consecutive year that this depletion date has moved in the wrong direction. The timeline is accelerating, the clock is ticking faster, and the window to fix it is actively shrinking. So that naturally leads us to the big question, why? Why is the timeline accelerating? Why did the date suddenly move closer to us? Well, the trustees' own report gives us the exact mathematical reason. It traces directly back to the legislation passed in 2025, which you might remember was often referred to in the media as the One Big Beautiful Bill. When this bill was signed into law, one of its major central provisions reduced the amount of income tax that Social Security beneficiaries actually have to pay on their monthly benefits. Now, let's be honest, looking at this strictly from the perspective of a retiree checking their bank account right now today, that sounds like fantastic news, doesn't it? And in the immediate short term, it absolutely is. It keeps more money in seniors' pockets today. However, the Social Security system relies on a very complex web of funding to stay afloat. Historically, a significant portion of the income taxes collected on those benefits was recycled directly back into the Social Security Trust Fund. It fed the system. By reducing those taxes, the law fundamentally resulted in less total revenue flowing back into the system. It's the ultimate double-edged sword, really. It's a tax cut today that mathematically accelerates a benefit cut tomorrow, because less revenue coming in means the existing reserve funds are being burned through that much faster, which actively pulls our timeline to that depletion date significantly closer. And that brings us to what actually happens when that trust fund is depleted. This is the moment where we dispel that bankruptcy myth once and for all. Because this is the specific part that almost all the mainstream news coverage gets totally wrong by being way too vague. Listen closely. The trust fund running out of surplus reserves does not mean Social Security goes to zero. It absolutely does not mean the program shuts down or disappears or goes away forever. Social Security is what we call a pay-as-you-go system. That means it will continue to collect payroll taxes out of the paycheck of every single working American. Money is going to continue to flow into the system every single day, week after week. So the really crucial point you need to take away is this. Those incoming everyday payroll taxes are projected to be enough to cover 78% of the total benefits that retirees are owed. The system isn't bankrupt, it's just short. It will be exactly 22% short, to be precise. This means that if Congress does absolutely nothing, if they sit on their hands between now and the fourth quarter of 2032, the law actually requires that benefits be automatically cut by that missing 22% just to balance the books.
The reality of a 22% cut, what it means in dollars.
Let's go ahead and ground these abstract percentages in some hard mathematical reality. Because let's face it, a 22% reduction isn't just some casual talking point for politicians to debate on TV. It is a massive structural hit to everyday household budgets. And if Congress fails to act and those automatic cuts trigger, this applies to absolutely every single recipient. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your health status, and it certainly doesn't matter how long you have been collecting your benefits. Nobody gets grandfathered in to avoid this. Right now, the average current Social Security benefit is roughly $2,811 per month. A 22% cut to that average check, that means a brutal loss of $458 every single month. That is over $5,400 a year just wiped out. Let's look at some other examples. If your current benefit is $1,500, your check would drop by $330, leaving you with just $1,170 to try and survive on. And for someone receiving a higher benefit, say $2,500 a month, you are looking at a really painful $550 reduction. I want to be incredibly clear here. This is not some hypothetical projection about what might happen to future generations decades from now. This is a mathematical, legally required projection about every current Social Security recipient. And the clock says this reality is now less than 7 years away. Now, the sheer severity of this approaching cliff has all the major organizations sounding the alarm louder than we have ever heard before. Immediately following that June 9th report, AARP responded with a formal statement demanding immediate bipartisan action from Congress. And within 24 hours of that, we saw reports released from both the American Academy of Actuaries and the Bipartisan Policy Center. Their message, which you can see summarized right here, is deeply, deeply urgent. They state the window for gradual manageable reform is narrowing. And what they mean by that is actually quite simple to understand. Think about it like fixing a leak in your roof. If you fix a problem a decade in advance, you can make tiny, gradual tweaks that people barely even feel. But folks, we are officially under the 7-year mark now. The longer Congress waits to actually act, the more drastic, the more painful, and the more sudden the changes will have to be when they are finally forced to the table. Time is officially a luxury we no longer have. Section 2. The new COLA projections, inflation, and your next check. All right, let's shift gears to the second major piece of news. On Thursday, June 13th, we received vital new data based on the May inflation numbers released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, to truly understand why this matters to you, you need to know exactly how your annual raise, the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is calculated. It isn't just made up, it's based on a very specific metric called the CPIW. This index measures inflation specifically for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Well, the May data came out, and it showed this CPIW running at a remarkably high 4.4% year over year. To put that in perspective, that is the highest reading we have seen in 3 full years. So why exactly is it jumping so high right now? It is being driven heavily by surging energy costs, specifically gasoline and utility prices, which are facing severe global and geopolitical pressures right now. And on top of that, food prices are frankly climbing much, much faster than the standard headline numbers might suggest when you watch the news. Because of this massive 3-year high, independent analysts are sharply revising their estimates for your next raise. Mary Johnson, who is a highly respected independent Social Security and Medicare policy analyst, she's tracked these exact calculations for decades. Well, she just updated her 2027 COLA estimate to a massive 4.7%. She even went out of her way to note that there is a significant likelihood it could climb even higher if the data continues on this current path. Just for some added context, another major group, the Nonpartisan Senior Citizens League, is currently projecting a slightly more conservative 3.8%. But regardless of who you listen to, the momentum is clearly undeniably pointing upward.
So let's break this down. What does a 4.7% raise actually look like when it hits your bank account? On the surface, this is the immediate good news in dollar terms. But to truly appreciate this, we really need to compare it to the raise you received most recently. Let's look back for a second. The 2026 COLA was just 2.8%, which only added about $56 to the average monthly benefit. Now contrast that with a 4.7% COLA in 2027. That would add approximately $98 to the average monthly benefit. That is nearly double the actual dollar increase you saw this past year. If you receive a slightly larger benefit of, say, $2,500, a 4.7% increase adds $117 to your check every single month. If you receive $1,500, it adds $70. Seeing these numbers mapped out like this really shows a substantial injection of extra dollars heading toward retirees next year if these projections end up holding true. It looks like a huge win, doesn't it?
The purchasing power trap, the catch behind the raise. But remember earlier when I mentioned there was a catch? Well, there is a hidden structural flaw built right into the entire CIOLA system. You have to remember the absolutely crucial nuance here. A higher CIOLA estimate is only happening because inflation is actively rising much faster than it was before. Yes, getting more money in your check sounds fantastic, but let's take a hard look at the actual math of your daily life. Under that 2.8% CIOLA for 2026, the average check went up by $56 a month. However, analyst Mary Johnson estimates that at the current May inflation levels we just discussed, with all those massive spikes in energy, gas, and groceries, it actually costs you $94 more per month just to maintain the exact same purchasing power you had a year ago. Do you see the trap here? Your check went up $56, but your actual real-world survival costs went up $94. That gap right there, that $38 difference, that is what is quietly, month by month, shrinking the wallets of seniors across the country. It's like a silent thief. A higher CIOLA in 2027 only partially bandages the structural problem. If the cost of your medical care, your home heating, and your weekly groceries is rising faster than the government's official inflation adjustment, you end up falling behind mathematically, literally on the exact same day you get a raise.
And we have to pause and recognize why this purchasing power gap matters so incredibly much to the country right now. It is so easy to just look at percentages on a screen and forget the reality, but we are talking about actual human survival here. A survey released this exact same week by the Senior Citizens League brought to light a deeply, deeply concerning statistic. Currently, a staggering 44% of retirees depend entirely on Social Security for 100% of their income. Let that sink in. They have zero other income sources to fall back on. No pensions, no massive 401ks, nothing to cover that gap between their $56 raise and their $94 cost increase. That is 24.8 million Americans living strictly dollar for dollar on this benefit. What is even more alarming than the total number is the sheer speed of this trend. Just 1 year ago, that dependency number was 39%. In just 12 months, it reaped to 44%. In an economic environment where nearly half the senior population has absolutely no supplementary savings, this widening gap between what the COLA pays and what inflation actually costs isn't just an inconvenience. It is nothing short of an absolute emergency for millions of people.
What to do right now? Practical takeaways.
So, what does this all mean for you today? First and foremost, I want to take a breath and reassure those of you already receiving Social Security, nothing changes today, nothing changes tomorrow, or even next year regarding that 2032 depletion date. The current benefit system is fully funded through 2032 under the current law. This is not an immediate drop everything emergency requiring panic today. Your checks will keep coming. As for the COLA, while a 4.7% projection is incredibly meaningful context for your personal financial planning, please do not make any permanent financial decisions based on it just yet. The official 2027 COLA will not be finalized and officially announced until October. That final calculation will be dictated entirely by the inflation data from 3 very specific months: July, August, and September. We need to watch the data for those months extremely closely. Finally, if you're watching this and you have not yet claimed your Social Security, this week's news adds massive, massive weight to your timeline strategy. Claiming earlier means you lock in your current benefit level before any potential congressional changes might occur. On the flip side, waiting until you're 70 guarantees a higher monthly payment, but it also means vastly more of your long-term retirement security is going to depend on a divided Congress actually stepping up and fixing a mathematical crisis before that 2032 deadline hits. Neither approach is universally right for everyone, but you deserve to make your choice with this exact accurate data right in your hands.
So here we are. We have officially crossed under the 7-year mark. The mathematical reality of a 22% cut is locked in under current law if nothing changes. And inflation just continues to silently erode the purchasing power of the very checks going out today. The window for gradual, painless reform is rapidly closing right in front of us. The stakes are no longer just theoretical talking points, they are guaranteed by the math. So the ultimate question we are left with, the one we all have to watch unfold, is this. How will Congress actually act before 2032? And what will their eventual forced compromises mean for your hard-earned benefits? You're going to be hearing politicians debate this endlessly over the next few years. But now, you understand exactly what is actually on the line underneath all the spin. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Stay focused, stay informed, and I'll see you next time.